Hello and welcome to week 41's gameplay episode. We have with us some gameplay expertise as well as JoshXLS. Hello, welcome back.
Oh, that was brutal intro. But thanks for having me, Ben. Obviously, I'm not comparing myself to our guest today, but I have some expertise. It depends on the level you're talking about.
You do have gameplay expertise, but not expertise in terms of the height of 𝘬𝘬𝘬𝘦. So,
no, that is true.
As established on the content podcast, yeah.
Requires a formal apology, I think.
What was it? You confused him with 𝘬𝘬𝘬𝘀?
Yeah, I knew there was someone who was 5'9", but played like they were 6'3", and looking through everyone who's 5'9", I think it's 𝘬𝘬𝘬𝘀. At some point, clearly, I've morphed them over, because I knew 𝘬𝘬𝘬𝘀 was 5'9", but I would have I'd have gone to bat that 𝘬𝘬𝘬𝘬 was 5'9" in game, and he's really not. He's 6'3".
The hair adds, 6 inches or something like that.
So I've heard.
And we also have with us the man who is providing some gameplay expertise. It is Ivan, aka DrNightWatch, coach and former pro, of course. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Talk about a bit about gameplay. Yeah, the 𝘬𝘬𝘬𝘀 in Josh's defense, it is the long hair don't care tax. So it's fine.
Yeah.
We all made the same mistake when we play the game, if that's 𝘬𝘬𝘬𝘬𝘀 or 𝘬𝘬𝘬𝘬𝘀. So don't be too harsh on it.
I mean, I was going to say, who started the whole kind of hair tax thing? Was it David Luiz, would you say? I think it probably was. Trying to think who had big hair, and maybe 𝘭𝘵𝗲𝗻𝑒 even, many years ago. But yeah, let us get into talking about, I guess, the focus of the conversation. We're going to be continuing a bit later to talk about how EA can make the gameplay more engaging. It's something we spoke about on last week's Supporter Gameplay podcast, but we'll get Ivan's thoughts and perhaps add a few more things into the mix as well. But we're going to start with something that's been coming up a lot recently. We've had a lot of weird players that don't necessarily feel like players that we've had through the rest of the cycle. We're also reaching a point where the stats attributes on players are just really, really high, and differentiating players, although often they have varied playstyle pluses, can be a little tricky, and knowing whether one player is better than another, it can be tricky as well. Obviously, there is a GG rating out there for people on �foot.gg to help, but I think it's interesting to talk about what can be particularly helpful for differentiating, and we'll sort of go through and cover some of the key things. I guess we're also getting to sort of 5 playstyle pluses as well at this point. So I think let's start with what is relatively, I guess, more straightforward. It's something we've had for a long time, and that is attributes and stats. I think, Ivan, there's maybe a bit of a tendency for people to be like, oh, this player's got 92 plus in this face stat, this player's got 95, 96, they're pretty much the same. But it definitely gets a lot deeper than that.
Yes, and I'm kind of a victim of that, because especially when you compare it to at the start of the year, where you have clear difference between gold items. Now the game is obviously overly saturated with so many promos, so many items, so many playstyles, so many everything, that when I see an item on the game that has 92 pace versus one that has 96 pace, in my head, that's the same player, right? They're both end game items with stats and playstyles to match. Whereas when you actually think about it, the difference between 96 and 92 is the same as between 92 and 88, which at the start of the year is a difference you would make in your team when you choose a striker, for example, or a winger. You would obviously much rather a 92 pace player than an 88 pace player. And so I think having these upper, high 90 stats kind of skews your perception of it's basically the same item, there's no difference. Whereas I think there is, and it's probably very noticeable in game as well. And I say probably because I haven't tested all these items that have come out.
Well, one thing that I think is quite notable as well is that the gameplay team said in the past that they worked to make more of a difference between players with higher in-game stats, obviously being aware that the nature of the game means that we end up with players with quite high stats in the high 90s, relatively earlier than we used to get in previous cycles. So it's become an important area of kind of gameplay improvement to make sure that there is that difference. And that is quite interesting because I guess, Josh, you do see a lot of people, as we sort of have had, 3-4 playstyle pluses being quite common over the previous month or two or a couple of months, that people are like, oh, there's not really any difference between these players. But actually, yeah, the stats do still have an impact. Playstyles may be a bit outsized, but they certainly do.
Yeah, I mean, like even the most recent patch obviously made that change to passing, where it said that the stats would be like important and that you could still pass with good stats. You didn't need the playstyle. So I think it's it's very easy to focus on those, 4 or now 5 little icons to the left of a card and dictate from that whether a card is good or not. And I definitely think they can make or break a card. But when we're going through some of these like new players that we're getting, it really is kind of quite eye-opening, I think. The expense of some of the cards, or the way people talk about some of the cards, and you look at the stats and go, well, yeah, obviously they've only got like low 90s in shooting or 92 composure like that. But 𝘬𝘬𝘦 only has 92 composure. And there is that feeling of, well, yeah, but that's really good. It's like, no, it was really good. It's not anymore. I think it's the same with like 4-star 𝗏𝘓𝘓. The price of Saka just makes no sense to me, considering the fact he's got 4-star 𝗏𝘓𝘓. Like, I think we're past that point now in the game where that is I don't want to say acceptable, but where that is the level of card that we now need is 5-star, 5-star, at least in midfield and forward. Like, obviously, you probably don't need 5-star skill moves in defense unless you're an absolute psychopath. But, I don't know. I think it can often get overlooked. I think that's natural when you have so many different elements of a card that need to be looked at from their accelerate type. Like, I'm wondering as stats get better and better, it's going to get harder and harder for cards to be fully lengthy. And I wonder if there's going to be a bit of a crossover point where actually the max speed of a card is going to decrease of the new ones that are being released. And there might be a card that's currently in the game now that rises back to prominence later in the cycle because they're quicker than every one of the new cards because they can be fully lengthy. And actually that is an advantage that you get. So when you consider like the nuances in how what goes into making a card good, even the body type, the positioning and footedness of a player on the wings, like can they hit a 𝗏𝘃𝑚 on their, because you have to hit it on your strong foot. So can they do that? Like, I don't know. There are so many aspects that it's kind of natural that the very first thing we used to judge cards, which is just their stats, has kind of been forgotten about a little bit. I don't think it's kind of outrageous that that's happening, but it is quite noticeable, I think. And people overlooking chem styles, like the number of teams I come up against where no one has a chemistry style or has a chemistry style that makes no sense. Like the number of centre-backs I come up against now who've gone through that 99 defending Evo and they've still got a shadow on them. And it's like, even if you want the pace, just stick a catalyst on, like get something out of that chemistry style. Like, why have you got a shadow on them? People just get a bit, I think, stuck in their ways. And we're seeing it with like the 𝘬𝘂𝗏𝘏 goalkeeper card, like those nuances that you have to kind of pay attention to of like what stats are being boosted by your chemistry style. Like if you've got that 𝘬𝘂𝗏𝘏, the number of people that go, oh, he's terrible. It's like, yeah, stick any goalkeeper chemistry style on him and then you'll see he's actually pretty good because he comes with an outfield basic. So yeah, I don't know. I think it does get difficult at this point to differentiate between cards, and it requires quite a deep understanding of the game. But it's still there. Like, don't overlook those core things. Stats are still important.
Are there any particular stats that you feel are definitely things that you notice a difference when they're sort of lower 90s versus higher 90s? I feel like composure might be one of the more obvious examples.
Composure, stamina to an extent, especially if there's no relentless there as well. And then attack positioning or defensive awareness. especially for players at the extremities on the pitch. I feel like it massively affects the frequency of runs they make, the quality of the runs they make, their ability to track defensively. And actually, if you look, they're very difficult to boost with chemistry styles, attack positioning and defensive awareness. There's only certain chemistry styles that really boost them more than a +4. Outside of that, shot power, like I really feel shot power, especially if you don't have low driven plus. And again, it's all within context. But if you don't have low driven plus, like scoring in the box with someone with low 90 shot power becomes quite a bit more difficult. But yeah, I think outside of that, just kind of going back, maybe like zooming out a little bit, the other thing that I notice when I look at a card is where they have a deficiency in a stat. Like, is there dribbling and passing and shooting low? Because if it is, it's going to be difficult to bring all of those up if you also want to increase the pace. Like, it's about those little areas in a card. Like, you know, in attack, sometimes you want to boost agility and balance because you're going to want them to feel nippy and quick and good on the ball. But sometimes you want to leave it low because you want to keep them kind of controlled lengthy. So those, like, that is a big difference between like 90 and 99 agility when it makes somebody change their accelerate type. You really do notice that in games. So yeah, definitely composure, definitely attack position and defensive awareness. They would be like my 3 that I would really concentrate on trying to get as high as possible.
Yeah, and I think people often forget that defensive awareness massively impacts jockey speed. In fact, I think it is pretty much the only thing that really impacts jockey speed apart from the jockey playstyle and playstyle plus. So not only is it defensive positioning, but it's also jockey speed as well. So it is a really important stat. And yeah, I was going to say, not only what you're saying about those particular stats, which I agree with being important, but I guess it's also going to depend whether they have playstyles that can compensate for those stats. So, you know, I'd be less concerned about a player with low shot power if they had low driven plus and finesse plus, right? Less concerned about passing stats if they had some passing playstyle pluses. But sometimes you do need those to work together to make the playstyle work. And it sort of does vary, I think, playstyle to playstyle. Like I noticed with incisive plus, if the stats aren't good, it's quite obviously not great. If a player has low shot power, even low curve, then finesse plus is still really good. It doesn't seem to matter that much. And similar with low driven and shot power, like it doesn't seem to have a big impact. So you start to learn, I guess, where these differences are. And yeah, it's one of the reasons why it's good to try out lots of players, but also have a look and see, you know, how that player's stat and playstyle makeup looks when you're using a player, so you can kind of start to put together what is working and what isn't working. But yeah, there's a lot to consider. Ivan, anything to add on specific stats that you really look out for once the players get up to the top end?
I think the one that you noticed mostly is indeed stamina. For one, you cannot boost it with chem styles. And for 2, you literally have something on screen that shows you how stamina works. And I don't think there's any other stat that has that in game. I've never been a fan of the fact that we don't have like transparency and absolute clarity on how stats work, with maybe the biggest mystery one being composure, like not exactly knowing what the diameter is of like the invisible circle around your player that impacts his stats or his shooting or his finishing or whatever it might be. I'm inclined to agree with Josh. I think it's stamina and shot power are the most noticeable ones. And yeah, defensive awareness, you did mention it regarding jockey. So those are probably the 3 that are unaffected. Well, defensive awareness is impacted by the jockey playstyle plus, but they are kind of more independent, like stats that you cannot impact with anything else. Because for example, attack positioning, you can impact it with creative runs, with player locks, with sending players on L1. Shooting you can impact with precision shooting or with time finishing. I guess that would also apply to shot power, but I think stamina is probably the one that I look out for the most, especially at the start of the cycle where relentless is a rarity, and stamina, especially on metas where you play 95 depth or you want to press more, I think stamina at the start of the year is really, really important, because you also don't have that many like very high level items that you can have on your bench as well. Whereas now, even if you have, like, for example, Kayn, the center mid, the shapeshifter item, has no relentless, doesn't have good stamina. On box to box, he absolutely dies in the middle of the game. But you have no issues in bringing on like an Isaac or Mia Hamm or whoever else it might be, who is just as good for this point of time in the game. Whereas at the start of the year, you can't really afford to do that.
Yeah, I'd also highlight, you're saying about stamina not being boosted by chemistry styles. It's the same with composure, isn't it? Which is a big reason why composure can be very important. And reactions is also quite hard to boost with a chemistry style, but is an important one too. Effects like animation speed, obviously reaction time, so it's very important. And just to go back actually quickly, your point about players being helped if they can have certain chemistry styles to boost their stats in specific ways, Josh. The nice thing about this point in the cycle is there are players with like 99 pace, for example, or near 99 pace, and not having to boost one stat category can make such a big difference in terms of how much you can boost other stats. And, if they did have something like low reactions, maybe you put a Maestro on, which is one of the only ones I think which gives a +8 reaction boost, or something like that. So there's then ways of compensating for flaws, whereas, you generally do almost have to boost pace in a lot of circumstances, so that can really help out and something to look out for.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd necessarily agree you have to boost pace. I think a lot of people feel that way, and it's very understandable. There was a point earlier in the cycle where I think 𝗏 switched to having Sentinel on his defenders to boost their defensive awareness, and found that he was able to defend far better with them than just having a shadow on them. And I think one of the things to really look at is when you're looking at those, like the full pace chem styles, so you're looking at shadows and catalysts and hunters, actually look at the stats that they're boosting and how much boost there is in the second category. Because although it's +8 on the 2 pace categories, say for a hunter, you're getting +4 attack positioning, +8 finishing, +4 shot power, but you're wasting 20 stat boosts on volleys and penalties. It's a +12 volleys, a +8 on penalties. What happens when you don't have to use a hunter is that you can start pinpointing the area in shooting that is low. So if someone had super low shot power, using a hunter on them is only going to give them the +4 in shot power. Whereas if you're able to put a Deadeye on them, you get +12 in shot power. And so it allows you to be more precise about what it is that you're specifically boosting. Shadow's kind of good, but the +12 in the defending category goes in slide tackle, which is something people don't use all that much. And you only get a +4 in defensive awareness. So again, if you can then go to something like a Sentinel, you get the +8 in defensive awareness, and you get +8 in interceptions. And so you can, again, start like really highlighting the areas of a card that are worse. And I think that's why I've always liked, say, Engine as a chemistry style. Like, I think it boosts really important things. Like, if a player's got low reactions and ball control, then, obviously you're going to have to go with something else, but it gives a nice pace boost. It gives a really good passing boost kind of across the board, and then boosts the dribbling stat, agility, and balance. I also think basic is a really overlooked chemistry style, especially when we get to this point in the game cycle. Like, the places that it boosts is really like quite good, especially for midfielders. You don't get a boost on interceptions, but if they've got Intercept Plus as a playstyle, or if they've got even Intercept as a base playstyle, then not the end of the world. It's a +4 in defensive awareness, stand tackle and slide tackle, +4 in agility, ball control and dribbling. Like, you get that bit of pace. You get it's the only chemistry style that boosts both the attack positioning and defensive awareness, I believe. So, it's like, basic is still a chemistry style in the same way that, like, when you're changing tactics, no tactics is still a tactic. And so, yeah, I think not having to boost pace, I think it's something people should do earlier in the cycle. I do think there's a difference between, say, like 94 and 99 pace, 100%. But I don't think I think there are times when you could get more out of a card by coming off like a hunter or a catalyst and going to something like an engine, go into an anchor. I think you can get more out of a card that way, especially when it comes to running styles as well. Like, would you sacrifice a little bit of pace to change to controlled lengthy? There are players that I would absolutely do that for. And if that means switching to a hawk, for example, instead of a hunter, then you get that bit of extra physicality. You still get a decent shooting boost off a hawk. You get the +8 shot power, +4 finishing. So it's not like it's that much worse than a hunter. So yeah, I think chemistry styles are maybe still underappreciated, underutilized, and undervalued, especially some of the ones that don't boost pace.
So I would just clarify that, if you can make a player lengthy with a hawk, so controlled lengthy, rather than just controlled with a hunter, you should definitely use hawk and take the plus or -4 pace to be lengthier. It makes that much difference for sure. I'd also say it's interesting, actually, you're mentioning Shadow being weaker in terms of defensive awareness boost. It is really nice that it gives a +8 to interceptions, though. There are very few chemistry styles that do that. I think it makes it very strong paired with the acceleration, sprint speed boost, obviously being big. And +4 defensive awareness is still +4. I mean, Sentinel gets +8, but it's a 4 difference. So at this point in the cycle, it's more likely that you'd maybe be able to play a Sentinel because they might have high enough pace already, and maybe it makes them lengthy or something like that. But in the rest of the cycle, defenders don't tend to be, or centre backs certainly don't tend to be super quick. On that, actually, I think we will take a break there. We'll be back to talk a bit more about playstyles and then move on to other things. Hello, and in this break, a quick reminder that the pod is made possible by supporters. The pod didn't used to be weekly. Yes, Foot Weekly wasn't actually weekly for a time. And then someone suggested setting up the Patreon. And since then, the pod has been weekly. And in fact, it's been twice weekly because there is that supporter episode every single week. So if you'd like to catch that episode and keep the podcast going, it's just £3 a month to do so. And you get loads in return. And there are perks higher than that, including access to the Discord too. So if you're interested and would like to support the podcast, then head over and search Support for Weekly. Go to Patreon and it's very easy to sign up. If you are a supporter keeping the podcast going, then a huge thank you for doing so. And if you do consider supporting, a huge thank you too. Right, let's jump back into the pod. Hello, welcome back after the break. So in terms of playstyles, we have talked a bit about them, but are there, I mean, you've got quite a lot of playstyle pluses now on a player, but are there specific ones now that are really, the key ones that you want to see? And let's avoid the obvious, like finesse plus, low driven plus, anticipate plus. What are the ones, Ivan, that, aren't necessarily obvious, but you're like, okay, it's nice to see that as a plus, or I guess as a regular base playstyle as well?
I think there's also a big difference between, for example, a tiki-taka, I think is more than enough having it in silver. You don't necessarily need it in gold. Whereas a pink pass, the difference between gold and silver is quite noticeable. I think having at least one dead ball player, even silver, I low-key think silver might be better just because of the fact that you have silver dead ball players from the start of the cycle. Whereas with the gold dead ball, you kind of have to learn, like from scratch, the amount of power you can put, how the curve actually works in terms of aim. But I think dead ball is one per team is an absolute minimum, regardless of where that's on the pitch at the start of the cycle. I think now a minimum is one left-footed and one right-footed for corners, for example, if you're good at corners. I believe intercept plus is also very big. It's one of the few chances you have of consistently getting the ball back off interceptions. You still get bounce backs even with that play style. Although I think they should do it in a way where intercept plus makes the ball stick to your feet every time on an interception, but that's neither here nor there. Other than that, I think first touch plus is quite underrated, just because of how quickly it allows you to transition from taking a touch to doing whatever you might want to do, whether that's feint where you want to turn to, whether that's quickly passing or mostly shooting inside the box. I think those are the ones that are kind of underrated, I would say. Chip shot is surprisingly good at pro level because the pros are very good at abusing those first time through balls that often leave you in a 1v1 with the keeper. And having a silver chip shot is pretty noticeable for players who are confident enough to chip it and not decide to finesse or low driven. And it's also unexpected because most pros, they just either bring keeper out or bring him out and move the keeper. So it always allows for a chip shot. Yeah, I think those are the more underrated ones. But again, I would not build my team around them. But if I'm stuck between two players, that might kind of tip the scales in one direction based on like the position they're in and if I need that on my team.
Mm. And what about you, Josh? Are there certain playstyle pluses that you've been looking at more in the current kind of extremely well-rounded player era?
I'm loving the shout for first touch. I think it's been a drum I've been banging for a little while. I really, really, really like that. Press proven. It's one of those where I just like to have it, even though I'm not exactly sure when it's helped me. But, it pops up every now and then, but it's more just like the feel I have when I have it. And maybe it's just the safe, I feel safe when I've got it. I do think aerial and a kind of crossing meta is beginning to... I'm not saying it's the most effective way. In terms of I'm seeing it be a play style, I'm noticing more. I'm seeing more crosses going in, more knockdowns. So I'd be interested to see if we start getting attackers that have aerial and power header more regularly, especially if we get, so far they've not put a goalkeeper properly up front. You can play Jack at striker, but I'm kind of awaiting that moment where there is I know Hudlin's been someone that people keep using all year at 6'9" or whatever. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on. Really, quick step and rapid. It's really boring, but when stats all become fairly similar and lots of people have very similar playstyles, just the ability to speed boost kind of and have that extra juice in your speed boost, it can be the difference in a tight game. I don't want to use it all the time, but if you do use it all the time, eventually it does work. You can't defend it perfectly for 90 minutes without being a truly elite defender. I think it's weird to say this. I think Finesse Shot Plus is undervalued. I think because of how good Low Driven is and how much people use Travellas, people don't use finesse shots in or outside the box nearly as much as they should do. They are still incredibly broken, and I just don't see it used as much anymore. So, yeah, the passing ones are interesting for me. I kind of agree with you. You can get away with just tiki-taka base. Maybe it's a placebo effect when it pops up above their head when they have it as a plus that makes you go, well, that was a really good first time pass. I've always liked ping passes, and I think Incisive Plus with a double tapped triangles is crazy difficult to intercept. So that's been something I've started focusing on a little bit more. Defensively is a bit weird right now though, because I don't really know what helps you defensively. Anticipate's kind of always the go-to one. Obviously, intercept's good, especially in midfield. Bruiser, I think, is something that can give you a bit of an edge defensively because it's something not a lot of attackers have. And so having that ability to just kind of use strength to win the ball instead of having to necessarily tackle the ball. I think when you go to make a tackle, that's often when you get those weird bounce around animations that result in those unfortunate goals, should we call them? So, being able to ease someone off the ball and kind of assume control instantly rather than having that free ball that happens when you make a tackle is more important. So, yeah, they're all they've all got some merit to them. Interesting that chip shot is massive in the pro scene because I had heard that it is from EA that it's one of their better playstyles in terms of the difference between not having it and having it. It's one of the most extreme. So it's not something I'd necessarily seen in game.
Do you mean the plus specifically or
the
base?
Plus? The plus specifically, yeah.
Because the base seems really, really good compared to not having the playstyle
Yeah.
as well. Like I have found that if a player has that, I can really consistently execute chip shots, and like there's almost like you don't even have to think, it just seems to have the right trajectory, whereas with players without, it's just almost hardly worth doing them. And that's actually something to look out for on your players. Like knowing the playstyles your players have is super important, and as they get more and more now at this point in the cycle, I think from knowing what they can and can't do, you'll have a big advantage, especially as people are rotating their teams or bringing players in and out a lot more, because there are lots of like, you know, more affordable, packable players around. I think you can definitely get an advantage from that. But yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about 𝗏𝘓𝘂. I found 𝗏𝘓𝘂 more and more useful as we see players with higher and higher strength, and also these kind of goalkeepers outfield, I guess, who are much more physical. I have this, people know because I mentioned him before, this 𝘵𝘵𝘚𝗏𝘀, and he has 𝗪𝘓𝘂+, 𝘵𝑎𝑛𝑡𝑖𝑐𝑖𝑃+, and Drochy+. And actually base quick step, his physicality in terms of, you know, going shoulder to shoulder before 𝗏𝘓𝘂 and after 𝗏𝘓𝘂 was still actually fairly noticeable. He had base 𝗏𝘓𝘂, sorry, going from base 𝗏𝘓𝘂 to 𝗏𝘓𝘂+ was actually quite noticeable, and I do think it is a valuable play style because of how much more physical attacking players are getting. And yeah, I would echo intercept. I think intercept in midfield, if you've got anyone in the defensive area in midfield, it's just crucial. And the plus specifically, the base isn't particularly great. Well, I mean, it's all right, but it's not nearly as good as the plus. But it's also really good at centre-back and full-back if you can get it in. But I think in the wide positions, defending the wide positions, Drochy+ is just so good that I'd be, you know, probably prioritising that, and intercept, yeah, and anticipate probably as more secondary options. But they're both really important there too. Yeah, I think you guys have covered mostly attacking stuff. I would say that if a player is not lengthy, they've kind of got to have rapid and quick step, at least base, if not plus. For both. I was talking on the content pod about having used the shapeshifters Ronaldinho and how that just totally makes him much less able to get away from players than he should be able to, because he doesn't have either quick step or rapid at all, and he's not lengthy. And so just, yeah, keep an eye on that, because it will completely, I think, transform a card if you can put a quick step or rapid onto someone who doesn't have it, who's not lengthy. And obviously, even if they are lengthy, it's just going to make them extra fast. So definitely look out for that. Talking, it feels like, you know, gameplay has shifted and changed a little bit more recently in terms of the content that's been put out. But certainly, as we were talking about last week on the gameplay pod, where we talked about how gameplay could be made more engaging. That was a supporter episode. Check it out if you're a supporter. Loads more discussion there. But it's something that I wanted to come back to and ask Ivan about. Do you feel, first of all, that it has been almost too long since we had a significant patch now, which was probably really January for gameplay? Would you like to see, even though you're, you know, working around the pro scene, so I guess you have to sort of retrain players and things like that, would you like to see gameplay patches that have significant changes in them more frequently?
Well, so on one side, we shouldn't also forget where we come from. For example, we have been playing for 2-3 years in a 4-3-2-1 meta alongside 5 at the back metas. So we're going from 4-3-2-1 and 𝗵𝗀𝗽𝗁 5 at the back formations to having 3 to 4 to potentially 5 formations that are viable in pro play, which says a lot. But at the same time, yeah, there's obviously room for improvement. The way I see it, and I sometimes like to compare it to other games and other esports, which is not necessarily fair on EA because of the nature of the games. But at the same time, I think EA has that luxury to actually do more than other games can. And I think yesterday we discussed that amongst pros. And one example I gave is between 𝗵𝐶 and Valorant, right? Because the pros were having this discussion that, except during the weekend, there's not really much to do throughout the week. You have weekly content on the weekend, but throughout the week, there's not much to do. In my opinion, it's also a case of the game just not being that attractive for viewers and for content creators to produce content on. And the game just isn't refreshed enough. So, for example, a game like Valorant, for example, they consistently have map rotations, map changes, agent changes in terms of metas, adding new agents. And probably a couple other things that I forget that just keep the game fresh and new every few months. So a new agent comes, people want to learn that agent. Something's overpowered, it gets nerfed, but something that's very underused gets buffed. In FC, we don't really have that to an extent. We have obviously new items, but also to a point where every week you get 20 items in game, which is so much. In Valorant, for example, you would get one agent every, I don't know what it is, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. So it doesn't have that same interest as it does in another game. Like, it doesn't have that hype. Obviously, you can't change the sizes of the pitch or the size of the penalty box or whatever. Although that in itself could be potentially fun for a weird.
What about Rush?
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of the examples I gave. That in FC you actually have different modes for throughout the week. You have Rivals, which is your ranked mode. You have Rush. You have Draft, albeit. I mean, I'm not defending Draft. I think Draft is long overdue to be changed or removed, but it's not that you have online cups, like the friendlies ones. There are things to do, but they're just not attractive to content creators and viewers because it just feels stale and feels the same. And one thing EA could do in terms of keeping kind of interest on the game, I feel, is what you can do with the playstyles and with roles and formations. For example, you have one formation that's overpowered. Okay, nerf it. Buff another formation, make another formation a bit better, or some roles a bit better. Like, if you want to make false back overpowered for a couple months, just so people start using false back, then if that's overpowered, nerf it a bit, buff something else. Same thing with playstyles. For example, first thing that comes to mind is press proven, but that would kind of allow this going in the lead and then shielding the ball at the corner flag. But you can like buff and nerf different playstyles like every couple of months, right? We have 𝘵𝗍𝗃 that's been very meta for the whole year, basically. Okay, make it that you nerf that one to the ground a bit more and you buff long ball a bit more, which was very good last year. So kind of tune playstyles every couple of months to keep the game refreshed. That will also spice up the market a bit, like make different players more viable, more usable. They have done it this year, in all fairness, with a power shot at the start of the year, which was, I guess that was kind of a broken mechanic in itself. But I think there's more to be done there than EA actually does. But I think it's also the nature of the cycle, where it's a 1-year cycle. You have to work on next year's game, so there's less focus on the current edition. Whereas a game like Valorant, you have to constantly keep it fresh to keep your users and attract new ones.
So I've got that was a really good answer, but I had a question from the first 10 words that you said, and I'm sure a lot of listeners did too, which was, you said there are 4 or 5 viable formations in pro play.
Yes.
In pro play, I agree. Why do you think that in top of the rivals, from kind of Div 3 up in rivals and in champs, 4-2-1-3 is the only formation anyone sees? And if in pro play it's not the best formation, why not? And how do people counter it in kind of at the very top of the game?
Yes, and as I said, I thought about the Weekend League example. I think it was one of the best formations for a majority of the game in pro play as well. However, I think there's a few things. First of all, with more end game items with pluses and the right playstyles, the more defensive you can have your team be shaped and still not lose from your attack, the better. So at the start of the year, you could not really play that's not a meta yet, but there's a window of opportunity more than there was at the start of the year. But nobody really could play 5-4-1 at the start of the year because you don't have a top end left mid, right mid with the right pluses on roles and with the right meta playstyles. That was just impossible. You didn't have those players in the game. Whereas now you have those players left, right, and center. Obviously 5-4-1 being an extreme example, but you never know. You see that with 4-5-1 right now, right? It's slightly more offensive. Although after the 5-back patch, it's debatable. So 4-5-1 right now is pretty meta in pro play because you have a line of 5 that it's pretty defensive, limits the middle and the wings. At the same time, your attack doesn't struggle as much because you can get the ball to your 96, 7, 8 Ronaldinho, and he can kind of carry the attack on his own. You also have the pluses on the left mid and right mid, and the occasional box-to-box or whatever you have on your CMs. And you actually have the numbers going forward, and your attack doesn't suffer from not having enough people up front. So I think it's pros also learning new formations, items coming out, pros learning how to play against the 4-2-1-3s. The fact that as the year goes, the 4-2-1-3 has not become better in itself, because back when it was really meta in pro play, you had a lot of items like your 𝘵𝘇𝗻s, your Hansens that have pluses on winger, but they didn't have them on left mid and right mid, right? So it only makes sense if you want to use those items with good playstyles and stats to use them in those positions. And I also don't feel the difference in pluses on wingers is as big as it is on deeper positions to make those offensive runs. There was actually a meta at one tournament to play out of position players at left wing and right wing because they would make the correct runs when inside the box, and when in build up they would just hug the sideline, not participate, but you don't need them to participate in build up. And if you just get the ball in their feet and just run in a straight line, that's all you really need. So I think it's a mixture of things. Mostly the 4-2-1-3 not getting better with new items and the game, the way the game's developed, and other formations becoming much better. And at the same time, pros obviously adapting and learning how to play with it, against it, and just finding counterplay. Which at casual level, you don't have that level of expertise, you don't have that time. 4-2-1-3 has a very low floor of entry, so to speak. You don't need that much knowledge or ability to be able to play it. Whereas, for example, A4-5-1, if you play it as a casual and you can't send players on L1 or player log good or creative run or whatnot, then you're not creating any chances. And you think, oh, this formation's shit, I don't want to play it. Or if you don't have the patience to build up a bit slowly. So it's a mixture of things. Usually it's the other way around. A lot of formations are playable in casual play, but in pro play, it's only a couple. Now with 𝘵ciq, I feel also it's kind of the other way around because there's a high ceiling in terms of tactics, which casuals can't be bothered, like reasonably can't be bothered to invest time in. Whereas pros, that's basically their job, and us as coaches.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Whenever I play someone who's high level 4-2-1-3 player, you can tell that what their idea of being good at the game is abusing specific runs and mechanics, basically. Because in that formation, you are not using passing play to create chances because you just don't have the numbers. And it's all about the counter and the specific exploitation, I guess, of the spaces that an opponent might leave because they're willing to maybe advance some players up the pitch. And I think it kind of makes sense that it wouldn't be super strong at the pro level just because you don't have that much defensive output from your forward players, right? And whenever you think about the 4-3-2-1, right, Ivan, that was really strong, partly because those players moved back into defensive positions like animals. Like they would just, swarm back and really help out. Whereas I think the 4-2-1-3, that's not the case. And if you advance forward with your fullbacks, for example, those wingers are not going to come and put pressure on you unless they're sort of manually controlled and you bring them back and things like that, which obviously can expose other avenues for attacks. So it does kind of make sense, but it is still kind of amazing how, despite that, how prevalent 4-2-1-3 is, and how I think I don't know, I'm not really sure what needs to be done, but it feels like even if there are obvious or ways of exploiting it, its prevalence does suggest that maybe something needs to change. And I guess this comes back to the point, right, Ivan, like these sorts of things, they should be on top of them and making sure that gameplay feels varied enough, because if they were to patch the 4-2-1-3, that's good, right, for the game's health. Like it doesn't need to be strong. Do you see what I mean? There's not really a reason for it to be, and they could rotate around to other formations and, as you say, kind of revamp the gameplay experience by doing that.
Yes, just want to do the comparison with the issues we had in previous years. Basically, what we've had in the last 3 years in pro play with 4-3-2-1, now we have in more casual play with 4-2-1-3, right? In pro play, we only used to see one formation only, and if you didn't use it, you were at a disadvantage. Now you have the same issue, but in casual play. So EA didn't do much throughout those 2-3 years regarding that specific issue. And for them, this should be an even bigger issue because it impacts a lot more players and a lot more people and is more noticeable by the masses than our issue was. So I think that's where I'm surprised that they haven't acted upon it, not specifically because of pros, but more so because, as you said, whatever game mode, whether that's Rivals or Champs, at a slightly higher level you launch, you just see that formation, and that's just not fun.
Like, I wonder, just kind of going back to the, how, say, Valorant changes their game and the idea of changing it on a more regular basis. Like, although we have had that this year, say, with the power shot being changed and the introduction of low driven, especially with power shot, that feels like it was just a mistake that got rectified rather than like a conscious decision of something's overpowered and like, let's change it and make something else better. I just wonder if they have enough like dev control on the game to make those changes. I wouldn't overlook how difficult, like how complicated this game must be to code. And I'm not saying that other games are easier, but when it's the same game, usually it's the same team that have built it. Like, this game has been built for so long now that the dev team will have changed so many times that there'll be areas of this game like that's just code on top of code on top of code. And thinking that you're nerfing one thing may make something else so broken the game would be unplayable. And so I just wonder if the game is simple enough in the way that it's developed that they could move towards a model where they were changing things deliberately on a regular basis, but had control over the effects that had on the rest of the game.
I think that's a really good point, and I think it's probably one of the reasons why we don't see frequent patches, because there's probably a fear that they could really mess up and make the game so broken for a period of time. But I suppose what we've been kind of arguing for is that they should have a sort of regular cadence of updates that means that if they do mess something up, at least they can, well, they have the time and resources to make the changes to remedy that. That being said, I know it's not been, we've talked about this a fair bit, and some of the responses to it have been like, oh, well, actually, I like the consistency of the game not changing so much, and actually, it's not really the gameplay in the sense of the mechanics that is a problem, and it's more actually, I mean, Ivan, you were talking about it earlier, it's more the kind of game mode engagement that is the issue. And I guess that does make sense to some extent. Maybe making kind of significant meta shift updates to the game throughout the cycle is kind of a somewhat dangerous thing to do, but we kind of see it anyway through the release of content. I think sometimes, we get content in the game that means that a certain playstyle becomes more viable. I mean, we saw it last cycle, right, with Aerial Plus and Power Header, and it doesn't become something that is an issue until a certain combination of type of player perhaps comes along. And at that point, we do need to see changes to the game. And so I think that they do have to figure out how to provide the resources to, regularly update the game. Otherwise, I think we'll face similar issues, especially with playstyles. I think playstyles have changed or have quite a drastic impact on the gameplay meta in a way that we've never really seen anything have that impact before. It's not the same as sort of like a sliding scale of stats or attributes that increases over the course of the cycle. These are quite kind of like clear shifts in the way players can be used. That means that I think there does need to be more done to kind of keep the game at pace, perhaps, with those content changes. Which can, as I was saying, make the game more engaging. Just while we have you, Ivan, is there anything particularly that you're thinking in terms of gameplay going into next cycle 26 that is kind of, they obviously struggled to start last cycle in terms of the gameplay. Is there anything that you're thinking in terms of having that high engagement from the start that really needs to be there next cycle? Maybe a change in terms of the gameplay right now, or just kind of an overall philosophy that you think they need to take?
In terms of changes, I'm actually very happy with like 𝘵𝑐𝗱𝗰𝘀𝘀. I've stated at the start of the year. I know some people find the introductions of playstyles of 𝘵ciQ and whatever restrictive, which in a way I can see makes sense, but in my eyes, it just adds some sort of consistency. Like, I do disagree that 𝘵𝘵𝗽 without a finesse playstyle should still be able to consistently score finesses 1v1 with the keeper. But at the same time, me knowing that a finesse plus playstyle will consistently give me pretty much the same shot, I value that more over the kind of realism aspect. And yeah, the basically expansion on 𝘵ciQ, which I would imagine is coming with some sort of new roles or focuses or maybe formations, would be fun and interesting for me as a coach in the way I see the game. And just generally, I think we've been saying that for years, we don't need as many new things as opposed to fixing whatever issues are currently present. And yeah, the main thing being potentially having like the gameplay be consistent in terms of whether that's how smooth it is, whether that's the result. As I mentioned earlier in the pod, Intercept Plus, I would like to have Intercept Plus be 100% success rate on interceptions, 0 bounce backs, to just have more consistency. It is less realism, but it depends what you want from your game, right? And the way I see the game, it should be fun, but should be also consistent. It is possible in other esports, so why not in FC?
Actually, just quickly, you mentioned bounce backs. That's something that I see a lot of complaints about, around the community, particularly in terms of tackles. Is that something that, you are frustrated by at pro level as well? And are there ways of mitigating it?
Also, with the bounce backs from tackles, I mentioned more intercept because it's a clear ball and player that intercepts. Whereas when you tackle, it's the ball, player that tackles, and player that's getting tackled. So when you have two players colliding, I am well aware with the way I imagine physics works in the game that you can't always have that consistent lack of bounce back, so to speak. So I imagine it's more tricky. Ideally, obviously, I would love you pressing tackle properly and getting the ball back every time. But at the same time, it's not as easy because there's also countless examples of you getting tackled from the back from a player with silver anticipate, for example, and they get the ball back, whereas they should never be getting that ball. In real life, it would be a free kick. So I would imagine it's a very tricky thing to code. I know that FC in itself is tricky because you have one ball and then 22 players on the pitch, whereas other games like, as I said, Valorant, you have like 10 players and just bullets that are kind of the correlation between them and, abilities and whatnot. So it is a lot more trickier, I would imagine. And the more variables you have, the harder it is. But yes, in an ideal world, I would like when I'm tackling someone face on when Anticipate Plus, I would get the ball regardless. But I know it's not as straightforward. And there's a lot of edge cases. And when you play thousands of games and you have millions of people, it's inevitable that you would at least get the feeling it's very inconsistent if it's not anyways very inconsistent.
Yeah. I think we're probably ready to wrap up, actually, Josh, unless there's anything that you wanted to slip in at the end here.
Yeah, two things. One thing I'd like to see next year, some sort of system where you could have like, I don't know, you could call it like super sub, and the player you sub on gets maximum chemistry. I've come up with that idea entirely myself. EA definitely didn't announce it and then did nothing with it. That was something I saw recently. I was like, oh yeah, they did say that, didn't they? I would like to have a modifier for low driven on the controls. I don't like that you can tap shoot and get an absolute missile. That feels wrong to me. Now, I have no idea how you do that without it being like 3 combinations of triggers, because everything feels like it's used for something at the moment. But it just feels silly that the most effective way of putting the ball in the back of the net at the moment is to literally tap the shoot button. Also, something I have noticed in people's gameplay, if low driven is something you use a lot, still try and aim your low drivens, because if you don't hit low, like if you then try and shoot and don't hit a low driven and you use precision, I think a lot of people have lost their ability to find the corners on precision, because low driven just goes past the keeper regardless of how close you've hit it to them. So yeah, it's definitely something I've noticed when editing NEP's games. So
yeah, it's been a while since NEP caught a stray for gameplay, because you'd seen some some kind of gameplay misdemeanor. But yeah, I think that does wrap us up, as I said. So yeah, Ivan, nice to have you back on the podcast, and yeah, hopefully you're having a bit of a rest after some busy traveling around for the pro scene.
Yes, esports World Cup yet to come, so a bit more travels in a very weather friendly country in the middle of the summer. But other than that, yeah, always surprised how much I can talk about FC with every pod. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, fortunately, otherwise we wouldn't all be here, right? And yeah, thank you very much as well to Josh. It's been nice to have you on, and I'm glad you didn't misheight another player.
Yes, well, maybe I'll have to try and sneak one into every podcast now. Maybe not quite as extreme as Hullet being a full 7 inches shorter. My missus has told me that doesn't make any difference. But, you know, I think I'll have to slip in the odd inch here or there.
Nice. Yeah, I was about to say we haven't had enough innuendo in this podcast, so that's good. We got it in the end, if you like. And thank you very much to all you listeners listening in. A reminder, you can follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can catch it on YouTube, and if you are catching it on YouTube, then do drop a like, leave a comment. Do check out all the comments and occasionally bring them into the podcast. And if you'd like an extra episode every single week, then do support the podcast. It's just £3 a month and you get double the podcast content every single week. Just search Support Foot Weekly or follow the link in the description. If you are a supporter, a huge thank you for supporting the podcast and keeping it going. And a big thank you to those icon patrons: Dave B, Darren W, Hugh J, Rob W, Brent P, Ralph, Josh R, Brian, Michael B, Adam R, 𝘵𝘀, Make B, Michael H, Andrew P, Arian B, Rob S, Michael K, Neil P, Jake S, Tom B, Alex M, Alan G, Lee A, Chris G, Mark M, Dom P, Rob P, Roger D, Dan W, Waterman, Also Ran, and Juicy. Plus a special thanks to Luke M, Dave B, Hugh J, Tom M, Darren W, and Pato Foot for advice and production assistance. Before I leave you, just one more thing to add though. Ultimate Team is a bit like life really. It has its many ups and downs. If you're having a few more downs than ups in real life in these more difficult times, then please don't feel that you're alone or need to struggle on without taking action. If you go to thecalmzone.net, there's loads of resources, advice, support, or even just a friendly chat for anyone who needs it. If it sounds like it could help you, then head over to thecalmzone.net. And for now, have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next podcast.